Welcome to another wonderful Susanna Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susanna Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. The Christmas Bride's Lie. Chapter 1. I have done it, Nettie thought as the train pulled out of the station. They had left New York in time. She would give her stepsisters a Christmas to remember in Oklahoma. Tears welled in her eyes as the buildings of the city passed by. She hoped to never step foot in New York City again. Her only memories of the place were painful. The train's picking up speed, Matilda said, bouncing on her seat. There's so much smoke. Bertha, her twin, pressed her nose to the window. She was the quiet one and rarely spoke, but when she did, it was usually something one did not expect from a 7-year-old. Don't forget what we talked about, Nettie said, tapping Bertha's shoulder to get her attention. Remember, you're to call me Ma now. Yes, Nettie, Matilda readily agreed. Bertha? Nettie prompted, her stomach churning with anxiety. I think you should tell Mr. Layton the truth, Bertha said, staring up at Nettie with her impossibly blue eyes. It hit Nettie then just how different her stepsisters looked from her. Would her future husband believe they were her children? He had to. She supposed the twins' father, her fabricated deceased husband, could have been blonde and blue-eyed, which would make it believable. Guilt flooded her. Hadn't she always preached to the twins how important it was to be honest? She swallowed a ball of saliva and patted Bertha's upturned cheek. I have no choice, sweetheart. I explained to you, remember? Mr. Layton has to think you're my children, that's the only way he'll marry me. Bertha did not blink but only kept looking at her. Maybe one day, you'll understand. For now, please call me Ma. Please. Nettie was begging, but her plan would only work if her sisters cooperated. Otherwise, they would be out on the streets in a strange town. All right, Ma, Bertha said. Nettie exhaled, tension leaving her body. They would be all right. This would be a wonderful Christmas, the new beginning of the rest of their lives. She settled back in her chair, her thoughts on all the things she needed to remember. Her first letter to Mr. Layton had been urgent, explaining her dire circumstances as a widow without a job and possibly homeless in the next couple of weeks. She was desperate for a life away from the city for her two girls, as it was very dangerous for all of them without a protector. That much was the truth. Ever since Nettie's stepfather died, life had taken a turn for the worse. It had forced her to leave her position in the wealthy Sutton household as Mrs. Sutton's personal maid and take on a position at the mill so she could be home early in the evenings to mind her stepsisters. That was when her troubles began. Mr. Evans had been her supervisor, and his interest in her had been fatherly at first, expressing concern as to how she was getting on at the mill. Then he had started looking at her in a way that made her most uncomfortable. Lewd suggestions had followed. Through it all, Nettie had forced herself to stay calm, hoping that if she ignored him, he would tire of it and leave her alone. She swallowed and tried to quell the revulsion building in her stomach as the events of that nightmarish evening came to her mind. After it happened, she couldn't work there anymore. She had been determined to leave the city after his attack, both for her safety and for her sisters. The mail-order bride advert had saved her sanity and her life. This was the first time in weeks she'd even allowed herself to think about it. She had managed to push it to the back of her mind, especially after Mr. Layton had written to her. She set her jaw with resolve. New York was in the past, and she would not dwell on it again. The train made quick progress and soon all traces of the city were gone. Strain eased from Nettie's muscles as the realization dawned on her that she was now safe. Nothing else could happen to her like that again. In a few days, she would meet her fiancé, and after a short period of courting, they would be wed. Mr. Layton owned a mercantile in town. That meant that she and the girls would never lack for anything. On her part, Nettie would help at the store and ensure that Mr. Layton did not regret his decision to send for her after exchanging only 2 letters. His proposal had been quick, and she wanted to show him he had not made a mistake. She was the right lady for him. Winter had come early, and the surroundings were blanketed in a soft carpet of snow. "Look, Nettie, the snow's white," Matilda said. Nettie gave in to the hope bubbling in her throat. Living in the city tenements where people squeezed together like ants, her sisters had never seen white snow. The snow they saw was filthy and brown from mixing with droppings from street animals and mud from carts and wagons. "It is," Nettie said. "I'm sure the snow in Powder Point will be even whiter." It was odd how Nettie was now fascinated by the snow when just a few weeks ago, it had terrified her. Everything had terrified her. When she left the mill, there had been no other job waiting. Her only hope had been the mail-order bride adverts. After writing to Mr. Layton, Nettie had virtually held her breath for days as she waited for his response. And every day it got colder and then the snow fell. She had no rent for the next month, and if Mr. Layton did not invite her and her sisters, they would spend Christmas outside in the cold and snow. She leaned back on her seat and rested her eyes, deeply grateful for his invitation. The train stopped twice that day for the passengers to have a quick meal in a small depot inn and to take on new passengers. By evening, the novelty of being in a train had worn off for the girls, and they kept asking if they were near their destination. A woman in the same car shot Nettie a sympathetic look. They had 4 more days of travel before they would arrive in Powder Point, Oklahoma. Chapter 2. "Good evening, sir." "Howdy. We're voting for you." Without breaking his stride, Ross smiled and replied to everyone as he walked into the depot and down the platform. Words he had written stared down at him from the notice boards of the depot, a reminder that the municipal elections were only a month away. There was so much to do as Powder Point was a relatively new town, and the victor would be the first mayor ever of the town. The whistle of the approaching train brought his mind back to the present. For the first time since he began communicating with Miss Nettie Evans, he felt nervous. Billows of smoke rose from the train before it came to a grinding hissing halt along the platform. There were few people getting off as Powder Point was the second last stop on the line. 2 girls alighted from a middle car followed by a pretty young woman. His heart lay suspended in his chest. Surely that could not be her. She looked too young to be the mother of the 2 girls by her side. She turned to him, adjusted her bonnet and smiled. He closed the gap between them in a few long strides. "Mrs. Nettie Evans?" he asked. She beamed. "Yes, and that must mean that you're Mr. Ross Layton," she said, her brown eyes shining. His mouth felt like it would split from smiling. "Please call me Ross." "May I call you Nettie?" "It's a pretty name." "Yes, of course." She spoke in a sweet melodic voice. Brown hair peeked from her bonnet and a few tendrils fell over her forehead. He tore his eyes away from her. "And these 2 ladies must be Matilda and Bertha." "Welcome to Powder Point," he said and gave an exaggerated bow. They giggled. He could hardly believe that Nettie was so pretty and so were her daughters. One would not guess they were mother and daughters, though. The girls had probably taken after their father in looks. They had blonde hair and blue eyes. An uneasy feeling crept over him at the thought of taking over a man's wife and children. He reminded himself that the man was gone, and his family needed someone to take care of them, which helped dispel his concern. When Nettie wrote that she was a widow with twin 7-year-old daughters, he had imagined a lady his age, about 26 years old. She looked much younger. She must have gotten married at a very young age. "Let's get your luggage and go home. Mrs. Stewart has prepared enough food to feed everyone on this train." The girls chattered together. He led the way to the baggage car and organized for someone to take their trunks to his home. "Is your place far from here?" Nettie asked as they strolled from the depot. "Not at all. It's on the same land as the mercantile," Ross said, excited to share everything with them. He guided the girls to his right, away from the road. Powder Point had gotten busy in the last year, which was a good thing, but it had also led to an increase in wagon and buggy accidents. He couldn't help but puff his chest out a bit at his ready-made family. He waved and exchanged greetings with the townsfolk. "Is that you on the picture?" Nettie asked, pointing at the wall of the post office. The very same, he said. Didn't I tell you that I'm running for mayor? Whoever wins will be the first mayor this town has ever had, but I must say he'll have his work cut out for him. Seeing the interest in Nettie's eyes, he expounded on his favorite topic, the urgent things that needed to be done in the rapidly expanding town. If he were elected, the first thing he would do was to establish a committee to oversee the establishment of a reliable source of water in the town, followed by the creation of a fire department. Before he knew it, they had reached the end of the main street where his mercantile was located. He took them around to Union Street, to the main entrance of his home. You can enter the house through here if you don't want to go through the store, he explained as he led them onto the porch. Will we go and see the store? Bertha asked, looking at her mother. This is your home now, Ross responded. You're free to go into the store whenever you want. You just have to be careful not to touch anything. We don't want things falling on your pretty heads, do we? He could get used to hearing the sweet sounds of children's laughter. He had nieces and nephews back in the East, but he saw them rarely. He was pleased with his home. He had spent a lot of time with the builder, getting it right for the family he knew he would have one day. The porch wrapped around the house and he had arranged chairs at the front for those evenings when one wished to enjoy the breeze. Not that he ever had the time of late, what with his duties at the store and as a contender for the mayoral position. At that moment, Mrs. Stewart flung open the front door. I thought it was you, she said, beaming widely. Ross made the introductions all around and told Nettie and the girls that Mrs. Stewart had taken care of him when he was a boy. She was more than a housekeeper, she was like family. Matilda's eyes widened as she eyed him skeptically. Really? That must have been a long time ago. They all laughed. Mrs. Stewart ushered them in. I can't tell you how happy I am to have this house filled with people. It's been much too quiet. Chapter 3. Nettie had never expected to encounter such a large house out there in the frontier. The main door led to a whole room whose only purpose was to hang coats and umbrellas. It narrowed into a square hallway and then to a grand wooden polished stairway leading to a second story. On the left of the hallway was a parlor and the dining room with a connecting door to a huge kitchen. Nettie looked around wide-eyed. How would she ever find her way around? She had bitten off more than she could chew. Mr. Layton was far grander than she had imagined, and a possible future mayor, no less. Beneath his photo had been the words, bringing accountability and honesty to Powder Point. Nettie felt sick in her stomach. What had she gotten them into? It was clear that Mr. Layton valued honesty. He must never find out all the lies she had told about her past. She kept the girls by her side, ready to nudge either of them if they said something they shouldn't. Mrs. Stewart will show you to the guest room first, Ross said. Freshen up, and we'll have supper together in the dining room. I'll be in the store until closing time. Thank you, Nettie said. Nettie had never had supper in a formal dining room. The plate was always on her lap either in the kitchen or the parlor. The guest room was down another hallway off the kitchen. I'll be right next door at night if you need anything. We have an outhouse, of course. But Ross had a special room built, and as soon as the flushing toilet is available out here, he'll get one. In the meantime, I've put basins of water in the room and there is hot water in the drum, the kindly woman said. Thank you, Nettie murmured. The bedroom she was shown was wide with two large beds, a chest of drawers and a mirror on one side. Their trunks had already arrived and stood neatly near the door. Matilda ran to one bed and jumped on it. Be careful, Nettie admonished. Everything looked breakable. Her eyes darted around. This was too much. She had imagined a place on top of the mercantile, not a sprawling two-story home complete with a housekeeper. Well, I'll let you have a bit of time to freshen up, Mrs. Stewart said and left them alone. Bertha stayed by her side clutching her hand, probably as terrified as Nettie was. Rousing herself, Nettie went to their trunks. Perhaps if she kept busy, the knot of apprehension in her stomach would go away. She removed fresh clothes from the trunks for all of them, and then one by one, got everyone cleaned up. They returned to the dining room to find it laid out prettily with white plates and shiny silver spoons. Her breath accelerated. She hoped the girls would not drop any of those expensive-looking plates. Mrs. Stewart came in from the other door. "Mr. Layton will be with us shortly," she said. Ross walked in 5 minutes later. Nettie was struck again by his presence. There was something about him that filled the space he occupied. His booming voice and loud laugh easily drew her attention. He seemed to carry his heart on his sleeve, Nettie mused, watching the slow smile that spread across his face as he looked at them. "I can't tell you how much it pleases me to have 3 ladies to dine with," he exclaimed, and then pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat. Mrs. Stewart came in with another thin, middle-aged woman who was introduced as Abigail, her helper. They carried bowls of delicious-smelling soup. The girls did as Nettie had instructed them to before dinner and watched her for cues. She in turn watched Ross. He picked up the wide spoon with which to eat the soup. "It's very nice," Nettie said, her hunger overriding the anxiety she felt. She carefully picked up the same spoon. "It's potato and crookneck pumpkin soup. We grow our own vegetables on the patch behind the house," Ross said in between mouthfuls. He picked a napkin and wiped the sides of his mouth. Nettie followed suit. "What's crookneck pumpkin, Ma?" Matilda asked. Nettie's heart almost dropped. Matilda had only just remembered in time to call her Ma. "Within no time at all, you'll know all the vegetables that we grow and eat," Ross said to her. Abigail came in and carried the dirty bowls away. "Your house is very big," Nettie said. He placed his hand on Nettie's small one. Warmth flowed through her and a feeling of awareness enveloped her body. "Don't let its size make you uncomfortable. I want you to feel right at home. If I'm elected mayor, we'll be having people over for dinner, and it's just as well the house is big." Nettie felt like a swindler as she sat there nodding and smiling at Ross's plans. She did not deserve to be a mayor's wife. Lies had gotten her there. What made it worse was that Ross seemed such a good man. She had no doubt he would be elected as mayor. "How many contenders are there?" "We're 3, and I've been the longest in Powder Point." "I hope that counts for something," he said with a laugh. Nettie had an idea of the life that awaited her. Had she not told so many lies, she would have enjoyed the endless dinners and socializing. Now, she felt as though all the walls around here were closing in, and she couldn't escape. She forced herself to swallow the food, tasting none of it. She craved for bed. If she could only close her eyes for a short while, she could think properly. Chapter 4. Early the next morning, Ross shut the back door of the house and pulled up the collar of his coat. He hurried across to the back of the store as the wind picked up its fervor. It was pitch dark, but he could have made his way to the store with his eyes shut. A blast of warmth hit him as he stepped through to the back room which opened to his store. He lit a lamp and unpacked the merchandise which had arrived the previous evening. His mind gravitated to Nettie. What a surprise she had been. She would be perfect as a mayor's wife. She carried herself with dignity, and she had raised her daughters very well. There was no doubt in his mind but that he wanted her to be his wife. He kept glancing at the time as he worked, taking boxes of coffee and sugar from the storage to the shelves. At 6, he shut the door and retraced his steps back into the house. The smell of coffee wafted into his nostrils as he walked in through the back door. "Good morning, Mrs. Stewart," he called out his customary morning greeting as he entered the kitchen. "It's me. Nettie." "I never expected to see you up so early," Ross said, taking in her small waist and curvy body. His mouth went dry. It had been long since he had admired a woman. He smiled as it hit him. She was not just any woman, she was his fiancée, and the sooner he made her his wife, the better. "Good morning," she said almost shyly. She looked so pretty with her hair in a knot and her face freshly scrubbed. She gave him a smile. "I'm used to waking up early. Mrs. Stewart has just nipped out, but she'll be back." He waved a dismissive hand. "Not a problem." "Is the coffee ready?" he asked and continued when she nodded. "Let's go and have it in the dining room as we chat." He waited until they had settled down. "I know we barely know each other, but I'm a man who trusts my instincts, and they tell me that you're the lady I want to marry." Her face reddened, and she lowered her gaze. Many people found his forthrightness disconcerting. He hoped he was not making her uncomfortable. "I'd like to arrange for the preacher to wed us if that's all right with you." His breath suspended as he waited for her response. She finally looked up and met his gaze. "I'd like that, too." He beamed, pleasure carousing through his body. He felt settled, ready to face Albert King, who was his biggest contender, in the elections. The campaign's officially kicked off in a week's time, and he wanted to put his house in order before then. "When you come into the store, remember to pick out dress material for you and the girls." He wanted them to look beautiful in the ceremony even though it would be a very small one. Despite his love for serving his community, Ross was a very private person. He preferred his personal affairs to remain that way. "We do have attire for the ceremony," she said. "It doesn't have to be for the ceremony. I know that nothing pleases ladies more than new clothing. Take anything you need anytime from the store." "Thank you. I'm sure the girls would like that," she said. As they discussed details of the ceremony, he wondered if he was rushing her. She hadn't lost her husband that long ago. "Please, don't feel rushed. After the ceremony, we can continue sleeping in separate chambers until we get comfortable with one another." She smiled and lowered her head. He was glad he had reassured her. His initial instincts were right. Nettie was still in mourning for her late husband. She was so brave, for despite her own sadness, she had secured a future for herself and her daughters. They spoke easily as they sipped their coffee. Moments later, Mrs. Stewart came in with hot flapjacks. "It's odd to sit down and be served," Nettie said when Mrs. Stewart left the dining room. He threw his head back and laughed at her honesty. "It does take some getting used to. I tried to get Mrs. Stewart to leave everything to Agnes, but she would have none of it. I suppose it makes her feel needed and occupied." "I never thought of it that way," Nettie said. "It's nice that she's still with you after so many years." Nettie's every movement fascinated him. She ate like a lady, taking small bites and chewing carefully before swallowing. She sat bolt upright on the chair without stooping. The more time he spent with her, the more he congratulated himself on picking the right bride. "When I first moved here, I received word from my brother back in the East that Mrs. Stewart's husband had passed on, and she was all alone. She had no children of her own, and I knew she would be feeling very lonely. Having grown up with her, I knew her as well as I knew my own mother, so I wrote to her and invited her here. She agreed, and it's been good having her with me. I hope she'll let me help out in the kitchen sometimes," Nettie said. "I'm used to preparing meals and keeping busy." "I can't promise you that," he said with a laugh. "However, you can come into the store anytime. If you like, I'll teach you everything you need to know, and then you can help me when I have to be somewhere else." "Yes, I'd like that." She smiled and his heart skipped a beat. How had he gotten so lucky? He excused himself shortly after that and went to open the store. He had considered employing a clerk to help at the store when the campaign started. Now he questioned whether it was necessary. Most meetings happened in the early evenings, and during those times, Nettie could mind the store. Ross unlocked the door to the store and turned the open sign to face the front. It didn't take long before the bell rang, signifying the beginning of a new workday. "Morning, Ross," Mr. Herman said, limping to the counter. "Congratulations. Word in town is that your bride arrived yesterday. Good decision, son. A town mayor should have a wife. Now, here's what I need for the missus." Chapter 5. "Go on, we'll be fine. You'll find lunch ready," Mrs. Stewart said as she and the girls washed dirty potatoes in the sink amidst a lot of laughter. "All right, call me if you have a problem." Apprehension gripped Nettie as she exited through the kitchen door. What if the girls said something that would let out their secret? She would have preferred to have them accompany her to the store, but Mrs. Stewart had insisted they would be fine with her. She had gotten them busy helping her in the kitchen, and they looked so happy, she could not insist they go with her. The skin on her face felt tight, especially on her forehead. How long until she felt they were safe? Perhaps, when she and Ross got married. Nausea swirled in her stomach. Dishonesty exhausted her and made her feel poorly. For a wild moment, she considered telling Ross the truth. But she knew the preference of prospective grooms. Hadn't she been warned? The bride agency had told her in no uncertain terms that men didn't like brides who brought others along with them. Not mothers or fathers or sisters or brothers. Unless they were widows. If the bride was a widow with children, that was acceptable. Nettie thought again of Ross's slogan. Even his campaign for mayor was based on a platform of honesty. She swallowed past the growing lump in her throat. It was windy, and she pulled her shawl more tightly about her shoulders. She pushed open the back door and walked into what appeared to be a storage area. She skirted between the myriad of crates on the floor and pushed open another door. "There she is," Ross boomed as she came through the back of the counter. "Mrs. Meyer, meet Nettie Evans, my fiancée." Nettie stepped forward and shook hands over the counter with the smiling gray-haired lady. "I'll get the beans at the back for you," Ross said, disappearing through the door Nettie had entered. "You chose well, my dear," Mrs. Meyer said. "I've known Ross for a good 3 years now, and I've never heard an angry word or an untruth pass through his lips." Nettie's chest rose and fell. "Thank you." If her lies got out, would they affect his chance of being mayor of Powder Point? It had been so easy back in New York to concoct those lies about herself. But now that she was here, she saw what a mistake that had been. She should have told the truth, that the girls were her stepsisters and not her daughters. Would he really not have married her if she'd had 2 sisters in tow? Now, she was in it too deep, and she couldn't risk Ross changing his mind about marrying her. "I'm sure you're a good young woman yourself. Where are you from?" "I'm from New York," Nettie said, throwing a glance at the door and willing Ross to come back. Mrs. Meyer made sympathetic noises. "I know you miss your folks. I was in the same position as you are once. It seems so long ago now. Mr. Meyer brought me to the West when we were newly married. It takes some getting used to, I must say." As if reading her mind, Ross returned to the store carrying a packet of beans which he packed in a brown bag. "Here you go, Mrs. Meyer," he said and handed her the bag. After a few more minutes of conversing, Mrs. Meyer left the store. "Did the girls sleep well?" Ross asked, turning to face her. Her heart skipped a beat at his concern and the warmth in his eyes. He would be an easy man to fall in love with. "Yes," she said, smiling at how happy they had been when she left them in the care of Mrs. Stewart. "That's good to hear," Ross said. "Please don't hesitate to let me know if you need anything at all." Her heart lurched at the sincerity in his voice. How had she been so lucky to find such a good man? Few men would readily love children who were not theirs. Just then, the bell over the door tinkled and a balding, thin man walked in. As he and Ross exchanged pleasantries, Nettie left the counter and went to the aisles. She slid a finger over the shelves and then peered at it. Dust. She turned back and went to the storage room where she had seen cleaning supplies. 5 minutes later, she was busy wiping down the shelves. Working kept her mind from the growing panic in her chest. It was a few weeks to Christmas. Nettie softly sang Christmas carols. She loved singing. It helped replace her fears with a bit of hope and joy. Every so often, a customer entered the store and as they passed by her in the aisle, they smiled at her. A warm feeling engulfed her. In a few months' time, she would know all the people entering the store, and they too would know her. Having lived in the city most of her life, it was a novelty to hear people so friendly with each other. Ross spoke to every customer when they approached to pay, asking after their families and work. Later that day, Nettie did not realize that all the customers had left. "Thank you for doing that." "For cleaning," Ross said from behind her. She smiled. "My ma used to say that a man who did not work ought not to eat." To her surprise, Ross chuckled. "That's from the scriptures." Her face reddened. "Are you going to miss your parents very much?" he asked. Nettie panicked. She had not given a lot of thought about her parents. In this area, she decided to stick to the truth as much as possible. My stepfather passed on a year ago after a wagon hit him. My mother died 5 years ago from illness. Her voice broke. It had been a long time since she had spoken about the death of her parents. She hadn't had time to mourn either of them. When her mother passed on, her stepfather had surrendered to grief, and it had been up to Nettie to mind her sisters. "I didn't mean to make you sad," Ross said, placing his hand on her shoulder. She let out a shaky laugh. "I'm all right. It's just that sometimes I forget that they are no more. I hope this will be a new start for you and the girls. You've had your fair share of trouble." Nettie looked up at his hazel eyes. "Thank you for having us." Ross cleared his throat. "I'm the one who should say thank you. My life was feeling empty. Now, I have a full family, and for that, I'm grateful." Chapter 6. Ross adjusted his brown coat and then dug his hands into the pocket of his trousers. His eyes strayed to Nettie. She looked pretty in pink attire and a matching pink bonnet. Mrs. Stewart looked at him and grumbled. "You're going to become the mayor of Powder Point, and you should have a big wedding and invite everybody." "Nettie and I don't want a fuss," Ross said, looking at Nettie for confirmation. Her face was pale and her eyes red. "Are you all right?" "I don't feel too good," she said. "I'll just go out for fresh air." He followed her out of the church, catching up with her on the street. He found her doubled over, being sick. He wrapped an arm around her waist. When she was done, he handed her his handkerchief. "I feel better now," she said with a nervous laugh. "You must see Doc Brown as soon as you can," he said as worry lodged in his chest. "It's just nerves." Her words brought a new worry in his mind. Was he rushing her? Maybe she needed more time to get used to the idea of their being married. "We don't have to get married today if you're not ready." It was not what he preferred, but he would do anything to make Nettie comfortable. She looked up at him in surprise. "Of course, I want to get married today. That's why I came to Powder Point, isn't it?" Relief flooded him. He took her hands into his. "We haven't known each other for long, but I've never wanted anything more than I want to marry you. I want us to be a family, Nettie." His heart swelled with emotion. Was it love? Probably not. It took time to love someone, but he had very strong feelings for Nettie. They returned hand in hand to the church corridor just as the preacher was calling them in. 10 minutes later, they were leaving the church as husband and wife. Ross felt as if he would burst from happiness. "Let's go to the hotel and have lunch," he suggested. "I would have preferred to prepare something for both of you myself," Mrs. Stewart said. The girls joined in the laughter, their eyes round, almost as if they were stunned at the entire proceedings. Ross joked that Mrs. Stewart believed that she was the only good cook in the whole of Oklahoma. At the hotel, it felt good to introduce Nettie as his wife and the girls as his new daughters. On Nettie's part, she seemed as happy as he was. Her skin had lost its pallor, and now she glowed. She'd probably just been nervous before the ceremony like she'd told him. Back at the house, Nettie waited until Ross came into the parlor to speak to her. "Please don't worry about sharing my chambers with me. I know it's too soon. Feel free to continue sleeping with the girls in the guest room. But I do want to move into your chambers," Nettie said, her voice quivering only slightly. "I don't want to start any gossip. Mrs. Stewart is very discreet and would never gossip about this household." "I didn't mean that." "I'm sure you didn't," Ross said. "Please let me make myself clearer. Don't feel compelled to do something out of worry over what people will say." Nettie frowned. "But if you're going to be the mayor, don't we have to be careful about what people say about us?" He smiled. "I believe that as long as I live my life with honesty, I don't have to worry about what people will say." Nettie's heart dropped to her knees. There was that word again, honesty. "I still want to sleep in my matrimonial bed." "All right. I'll help you move your things." "Thank you, but I can do it," Nettie said, knowing she had to have a talk with the girls. They probably weren't expecting her to move out of their room. "Nettie, I don't understand, Bertha said when Nettie told them Ross was now her husband, and they would have to share chambers. What do we call Mr. Ross now? Nettie's head pounded. If only she could take back the lies she had told. Would they forever come back to haunt her? Chapter 7. The sermon for the day revolved around the Christmas celebrations coming up in a few weeks. From her pew, Nettie could see light snowflakes falling outside. She felt snug and warm seated between Ross and the girls. They were a family. It had felt good walking up to the church together, with Ross waving and introducing them to people. Nettie now knew the ones who came to the store regularly. The preacher announced that the ladies were to remain after the service for a short meeting, and then he called for the last hymn of the service. "I'll stay behind," she whispered to Ross. "All right," he said. "I'll go on home with the girls." As people shuffled out, Nettie and the other ladies who had remained behind moved to the front pews. When the church had emptied, a lady who introduced herself as Sally Ward spoke. A woman seated next to Nettie told her she was the preacher's wife. "First of all, I'd like to welcome Mrs. Layton to our church," Sally said, and everyone clapped. It took a second for Nettie to realize they were referring to her. "Let's all make her feel very welcome." "Welcome," they chorused. Nettie couldn't stop smiling. How lovely to be part of such a loving community. Sally spoke about the choir they formed every Christmas, giving the background for Nettie's benefit. When Sally asked for volunteers for the choir, Nettie was the first one to raise her hand. She loved singing, and she wanted to participate in the community who was giving her such a warm welcome. They agreed to meet every Sunday morning just before the service. When the meeting was over, two ladies came to speak with Nettie. The only cloud to the otherwise perfect morning was when they asked her about Bertha and Matilda. "And those two lovely girls are your daughters?" one asked. Nettie's mouth went dry. If she said yes, she would continue with the lie, but if she said no, she would have to explain who they were and know it would get back to Ross. She was saved from answering when Sally joined the circle. "Mrs. Layton, it's a pleasure to have you join us," she said, smiling warmly. "Please call me Nettie." Nettie smiled back, but the earlier joy she had felt had dissipated. She just wanted to go home. After a decent interval, she excused herself and hurried out of the church, keeping her eyes on the ground to discourage anyone else from speaking to her. She pushed open the front door of her new home and entered, following the laughter that came from the kitchen. Everyone was seated at the table, eating. "I could hear all of you from outside," Nettie said, tousling Bertha's hair. "Mr. Ross was telling us about the time he cooked for himself," Bertha said. Nettie chuckled at the thought of Ross cooking and making a muddle out of it. "Isn't it about time you called me by a name other than Mr. Ross? Like Pa?" Before Nettie could react, Matilda spoke. "Will Nettie have to call you Pa also?" "No, of course not," Ross said. "Well, if we call you Pa, Nettie will have to also," Matilda continued. It all happened so fast, Nettie had no time to jump in and save the situation. "Why would she?" Ross asked. It was so silent in the room, Nettie could hear herself breathe. "I don't understand," Ross said. "You do know that we got married, don't you?" Matilda's eyes were huge, and the guilt on her face was painfully clear. Bertha, also, had fallen silent. Nettie gulped and tried to laugh, but it came out more like a groan. "What's confusing you girls?" Ross asked. He looked at Nettie. "Don't they understand that I'm your husband now?" He looked so baffled that Nettie's legs nearly gave out. Of course, he didn't understand their confusion. How could he know that they were thinking that as sisters, they would have the same Pa? Nettie gulped again, knowing she couldn't keep this lie going any longer. It wasn't fair to her stepsisters, and it wasn't fair to Ross. "Matilda, Bertha, will you please go and eat in the parlor?" Nettie said, her voice shaky. When they left, she made her legs move to the table. She pulled out a chair and sat down, taking her time, trying to delay the moment when her world would come crashing down. She looked at Ross. His eyes were confused and concerned. She couldn't hold his gaze. Shame roared through her, and she stared down at her hands. Tears filled her eyes. She should have told him before now. She should have told him the truth from the start. But maybe she could still salvage this. Maybe she didn't need to tell him the whole truth. She could simply tell him that ever since their father, her pretend husband, died, they had been confused. Nausea swept through her. Was she going to be a liar forever? She shuddered. This wasn't what she wanted. She sighed. It was better to get it out in the open. She would rather deal with rejection than the constant worry that Ross would out the truth. Bertha and Matilda are my stepsisters, she said. Ross gave a sharp intake of breath. What? Nettie lowered her head. Humiliation engulfed her, and for a moment she could not continue speaking. She choked out the next words. I wasn't married, and I have never been. Beneath the table, her legs trembled badly, and she was glad she was seated. She licked her dry lips. My mother died when the girls were 2 years old from illness. My stepfather took her death very badly, and I was forced to leave school and earn a living for the 4 of us. She didn't dare look at him. It was awful. I truly don't know how we survived. I took in people's washing. After a few months, I got a position as a personal maid and our lives got a little better. Then, just a year ago, Pa passed on after being struck down by a wagon. Her voice broke, and it was a while before she could compose herself enough to continue with her story. I had to get another job that would enable me to be home in time to see to dinner and sometimes sneak out at lunch hour to check on my sisters. She would have stayed longer in the mill were it not for what happened. Even now she had no name for it. She couldn't give it the name it had, for she couldn't bear to describe it that way. She wrapped her hands around her stomach and rocked back and forth. She did not want to speak of that day. Her chest ached as if someone was stabbing her repeatedly. What made you reply to the advert? Ross asked. I left my position at the mill, she said softly. Why didn't you simply tell me the truth? I thought the more desperate I sounded, the less chance I'd have. I was told that prospective grooms didn't like children tagging along. But for widows, it was all right, she admitted. She needed to tell it all if she and Ross were to have a chance at this marriage. Her stomach was twisted in a knot now, as she eked out the rest of her story. I was desperate to get out of the city because, a sob escaped her mouth. She cried as if her heart was breaking into 2. The nightmare of that day was never far from her mind, but now the memories consumed her. It had been her turn to clean up the workroom after everyone had left for the day. There were 14 of them who worked in the button room, and each day someone different tidied up. Nettie had just finished sweeping up the threads and broken buttons from the floor when Peter Farley entered. It was nothing out of the ordinary for him to have stayed behind, as he was the supervisor. Still, his presence had made Nettie nervous. He had leaned against the wall staring at her as she worked, saying nothing. Unable to continue wiping down the tables with him gawking at her, Nettie had decided to leave. The trouble was she had to walk past him. Her heart pounding, she had hurried past and before she knew what was happening, his big hand was on her mouth and the other around her waist. The next few minutes had dragged on into eternity as she punched and kicked until he overpowered her. He violated her painfully, degrading her, reducing her to a sobbing heap. No amount of her pleading helped. When it was over, Nettie didn't know how long she lay on the floor before she finally dragged herself home. She had found the girls frightened and crying. By the Lord's grace, they didn't realize that something terrible had happened to her. They were only frightened because she was late. That night, Nettie had known she had to leave New York. She could not spend the rest of her life in the city. She was determined that nothing like that would ever happen to the girls. The only way she could keep them safe was to get them as far away from the city as she could. When she finished telling her story, she didn't wait for Ross's reaction. She was sickened herself, so how could he be anything but sickened, too? She ran from the room and locked herself in their bedroom. Chapter 8. This town is growing at an astronomical pace, and we would like the mayor we support to build the foundation with that in mind. Ross nodded and gave the appropriate answers, but his mind kept returning to Nettie. It had been 3 days since she had told him everything, and his own confusion still had not abated. If anything, it kept growing. He couldn't understand why she wouldn't have trusted him with the truth. He couldn't understand her marrying him under false pretenses. Didn't she know how important honesty was to him? He was sickened and sorry over what had happened to her. He wanted to reach out to her, to talk to her, even to put his arm around her, but she would have none of it. She kept herself at a distance, moving away if he came close. In truth, he didn't know what to do. She had lied about having a husband, and that he had died. Ross couldn't get over that. Worse still, she had schooled the girls in how to lie. She had instructed them to call her Ma, yet she was their sister. His whole life and his mayoral ambitions were all founded on honesty. How could he be with someone who took honesty so casually? "I think we're all satisfied with the direction you want to take this town," Mr. Flannery said, interrupting his thoughts. Ross nodded and tried to force his attention to the present. "Most of you gentlemen know that I consulted with you to find out the most pressing needs our town has. I'll continue to consult with you even after I become mayor." When he was done with his speech, they were all nodding and clapping. Their support should have pleased Ross. Instead, he found himself oddly removed from it all, as if he didn't care whether he became the mayor or not. He was relieved when the meeting was over, and he could return to the store in time to help Nettie close up for the day. As he walked down Main Street, his mind went to Nettie's attack. His heart twisted with pain, and his hands itched to punch that person who had violated her innocence. How did his new marriage turn into such a mess so quickly? And shouldn't his compassion allow him to forgive Nettie immediately? He pushed open the door, and the bell to his shop tinkled. Nettie was behind the counter, and when she looked up, a wary expression came over her countenance. He tried to smile. "Did you have any trouble while I was gone?" "No, everything was fine. I served 3 customers." She said this with a measure of pride. Instead of teasing or congratulating her as he would have, he grunted. The pleased look on her face disappeared, and the tension in the store grew. How would they continue their marriage when things were so awkward? "Did the meeting go well?" she asked. Did she even care? His wife was a smooth liar. What was real about her and what was not? Did she have any feelings for him at all? It went well enough. "Will they support you?" "I suppose they will." His main opponent was losing popularity with the businessmen of the city because of his arrogance. His opponent was wealthy, and he wanted everyone to know it. He made the townspeople nervous about the direction he would take them if he became the mayor. The air thickened between them. Unable to bear it any longer, Ross went ahead and shut the front door and emptied the cash register. They left the store together, crossing the backyard to the house. Something else was bothering him. He had gotten little sleep in the last 3 nights with Nettie lying stiffly beside him. Enshrouded by the darkness of the evening, he garnered the courage to say what was in his heart. He cleared his throat. "Nettie," he said, and they both stopped a few steps from the back door. "I think we both need time to recover from everything. I know you're uncomfortable with me. And in truth, I'm uncomfortable, too. Would you like to return to the guest room until we decide how to resolve the situation? For my part, I need time. We are already married, and I'm not chasing you away from your home. But, well, this has to be dealt with, and right now, I'm not sure how to do that." She made a sound as if she were crying. He stood awkwardly, not knowing what to do. Nor could he ignore his resentment toward her for lying like she had. And then telling the lies publicly, so they had to be dealt with. She had spoiled the beautiful thing they had between them. The day she had written that first letter and claimed all those lies had started it all. "Will you ever forgive me?" She sniffed. "Have you tried to put yourself in my position to see how foolish I feel at being lied to? And I'm running for mayor with honesty as my foremost quality." My intentions were noble," she said in a small voice. He shook his head. "That's just it, Nettie, it doesn't matter what your intentions were. What matters is that you lied to me, and worse, you made the children lie. What are you teaching them as their guardian? That it's all right to lie to get what you want?" A sob broke out from her. "Even if we do agree to continue with this marriage, I don't see how I can ever trust you again," he said. I can't tell when you're speaking the truth or when you're lying. That was the only time I lied. I don't make it a habit to tell untruths, she said, her tone now rising. I know it was wrong, and I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say to make you believe that I will never lie to you again. Whatever I say, I mean it. He suddenly felt exhausted. Let's go in and have supper. I'm hungry. He turned and went into the house, leaving her standing there in the darkness. Chapter 9. Come on in, Mrs. Layton, Doc Brown called from his inner office. Nettie's legs were as heavy as tree stumps when she got up and entered the room, closing the door behind her. It smelt of medicine and for a moment, she thought she'd retch. She was now always on the edge of nausea, and the smell in his office made it worse. Doc Brown looked up as she entered, peering at her above the rim of his round spectacles. He stood up and stuck out his hand. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Layton. What can I do for you? Faced with the question, Nettie took a moment to sit down and gather her thoughts. I don't know how to explain it, but I don't feel too good. It comes and goes. Are you in pain? He asked. No, not pain, just discomfort everywhere. But mostly, I feel nausea and I tire very easily. She knew serious illnesses started that way, with mild symptoms that never went away and then over time worsened and became serious. Please lie down here on the examination bed. Nettie made her way to the bed, removed her shoes, climbed up and lay on her back. What disease did she have? She bit her lower lip to hold down a hysterical scream. Was she going to die like her mother? Who would care for her sisters? She certainly couldn't count on Ross for that. Now with the way things stood between them. She kept her eyes tightly shut as the doctor examined her. That's it for now, he said, not more than 5 minutes later. Nettie got up and stepped back to his desk and sat down. She leaned forward in her chair. What's wrong with me, doctor? Her nails dug into the palms of her hands. He looked at her solemnly and smiled. Congratulations. You're with child, Mrs. Layton. She grasped the edge of his desk as a coldness hit her core. That cannot be, she said, even as suspicion grew in her mind. She shook her head. No. Please Lord, no, not Peter Farley's child. And it would have to be his. Oh, dearest Lord. There's no doubt in my mind, Mrs. Layton. You're more than 2 months gone. Hot tears streamed down her cheeks. For certain, her life was now destroyed. All that she had worked for was gone. She was back where she started. The girls would remember this Christmas as the worst one they had ever had. Ross would not let her stay once he knew she was carrying another man's child. Oh, dear Lord. Nettie dropped her head into her hands. She could never put the attack behind her with a child as a constant reminder. Listen to me, Mrs. Layton, Doc Brown said. He waited for her to look up, and when she did, he continued speaking. Whatever we say in this office is between me and you. I'm well aware that your union with Mr. Layton was 2 weeks ago. But rest assured, the results of your examination will remain private. What you choose to tell your husband is your own business. The sobs now came out loudly and unchecked. The doctor's kindness had undone the last remaining control she had. He waited patiently, while she wept. Then she told him about the attack. I thought once I left New York and started a new life here, I could forget about that, Nettie said. I am very sorry that happened to you, Mrs. Layton, Doc Brown said, his voice filled with sympathy. But you must separate the child from how it came to be. How had he known that she was thinking how difficult it would be to carry and then love a child born from such terrible circumstances? All children are gifts from God, irrespective of how they come to be. The child you're carrying is special, as all children are. She nodded. What the doctor said made sense. But then, he didn't have the horrid memories or nightmares that she had. You will raise the child and forget about that terrible thing that happened to you. Something good has come out of it, a child. An innocent baby, waiting to be loved and taken care of. All the child will know is that you're the mother. He smiled at her and something in her heart shifted. She looked down at her still flat tummy. A small human being was growing inside her. What you tell or do not to tell your husband is up to you. I will neither corroborate on your story nor deny it. He knows about the attack, Nettie said. Well then, he knows that a child can result from such things. Nettie's blood went cold as she imagined herself telling Ross that she was expecting a child. There would be no doubt on who the father was. Despite sharing a bed with Ross, he had been a complete gentleman and had given her time to adjust to marriage and perhaps even develop feelings for him. If only he knew that she had started to love him from the first time she'd seen him. He was easy to love with his friendly and caring nature. And he certainly did not deserve further grief from her. She could just imagine the disgust on his face when she told him she was carrying another man's child in her belly. She knew what she had to do. She straightened her shoulders and stood up. Thank you so much, Doc, you have helped me more than you can imagine. When Nettie left Doc Brown's office, she turned left toward the post office. She stopped in front of the small notice board on the wall. She hoped and prayed that the notice she had seen days ago was still there. Her eyes scanned the bits of paper, and she stopped when she saw the one she wanted. She took a pen and paper from her reticule and noted the address. She would leave the following day with the hope that the household had not yet found a housekeeper. If they had, Nettie had a little money that would sustain them while she looked for another job. But if she stayed even a day longer, her resolve would weaken. Chapter 10. Pass my greetings to that pretty wife of yours and to your daughters, Mrs. Reed said as she handed Ross some notes. The girls are my wife's sisters, Ross said. Nettie hadn't come into the store that morning as she normally did. He glanced at the clock every 5 minutes, wondering where she was. He couldn't wait for noon to go back to the house. Despite things being strained between them, he worried about her. She had been very quiet the night before during dinner, and at the time, it had suited him well. But now, he was edgy and wanted to see her. When Mrs. Reed left, he glanced at the clock and decided not to wait for the 30 minutes until the time he usually closed the store for lunch. He closed up early and entered the house through the back door and came face to face with Mrs. Stewart. Your lunch is almost ready, she said. Was her tone cold or had he imagined it? He frowned. It was too quiet. He went straight to the chambers he shared with Nettie. His eyes immediately caught sight of the folded paper on the bed. With 2 strides he had the note in his hands. Dear Ross. I'm sorry I have to say goodbye in this manner, but I thought face to face would be too difficult. Besides, I don't want you to try to change my mind. We started off our marriage in the wrong way, and I am squarely to blame for that. After such a start, I don't think we can salvage it, and the best thing for us is to go our separate ways. I know that you agree with me. I've seen how uncomfortable I make you. I also want to convey my sincere apologies for what I did. I know it seems to you that I do not understand the magnitude of my lies. That's not true. I do understand. I also understand that were it not for my actions, you'd probably have found a more suitable wife. For that, I'm very sorry. What happened to me that day in the factory changed a lot of things. It also interfered with my normal rational way of thinking. Had I been my old self, I would not have thought of concocting lies about my past. I'm not trying to excuse myself. What I seek is understanding and sympathy. I would wish you to think kindly of me someday in the future. The girls and I have left town, and we're determined to start a new life elsewhere where no one knows us. As regards to our marriage, please don't let it stop you from marrying another. I'm sure you can get it nullified. I wish you all the best, and I know you'll be a wonderful mayor for the town of Powder Point, and a wonderful husband and father one day to someone more deserving. Sincerely, Nettie Evans. So. She'd gone back to her former name. He swallowed the bile that rose in his throat and hurried out of the room, clutching the note. He found Mrs. Stewart in the kitchen. When did they leave? She turned to him. This morning after you left for the store. Mrs. Layton would not let me come to the store to tell you. Do you know where they went? Ross asked. No, but I can easily find out. Do you want me to? He did not answer immediately. If he were honest with himself, it was a relief not to find Nettie home. He did not have to deal with her sad eyes and sad gaze following him everywhere. The guilt of seeing her and knowing something horrible had happened to her and that he could not offer any comfort was troubling to say the least. If he could, he would have kept the girls with him. They livened up the house. A pang of worry gripped him. Would Nettie be able to pay upkeep for the girls? He consoled himself that if things got bad, she would return him. Besides, the girls were not his to keep. No, he said and left Mrs. Stewart staring after him open-mouthed. He ate his lunch and for the first time did not feel as if he had to watch his every expression. It was wrong to be relieved that his wife had left him, but that was what he felt, relief. He returned to the store after a little rest and worked steadily throughout the afternoon. The euphoria of having his marriage situation resolved ended when he returned home that evening. The parlor was too quiet, and he felt odd seated there alone. The dining room was even worse. Were it not for his pride, he would have carried his plate of food to the kitchen to have his meal with Mrs. Stewart. This too, he would get used to, he told himself. He had been a bachelor before, and he had been just fine. Chapter 11. Nettie fumbled in the dark for her coat. From inside the housekeeper's small cottage, she could hear shutters banging from the violent wind. She wondered if it had snowed during the night. When are we going back home, Nettie? She went still. Why are you awake so early, Bertha? I'm awake, too, Matilda said. I want to go back home to Mrs. Stewart and Pa. Nettie shut her eyes and sighed. She too wanted to go back home, except it wasn't their home. I told you girls that we have to make a new life for ourselves here. It doesn't include Mrs. Stewart or Mr. Ross. So, do we still have to call you Ma? Matilda asked. No, honey. You don't have to call me Ma anymore. There's nothing to do all day, Bertha said in a small voice that tore at Nettie's heart. She had to remind herself that the girls were only 7 years old, and they didn't understand why they'd had to leave Powder Point. What about the Christmas songs we're supposed to sing for the Christmas Day service? Matilda asked. I'm sorry, Nettie said, now on the verge of tears. Please go back to sleep, I'll come and get you for lunch. It had to be the coldest day of winter, Nettie thought as she shut the door behind her. The wind almost lifted her off her feet with its strength. She walked carefully on the snow-covered ground across the backyard of the main house. There was no warmth to greet her when she unlocked the back door. She was the one who lit the hearths in the morning. The household had not needed a housekeeper, what they needed was a maid-of-all-work. She was the only servant in the huge 2-story house. The lady of the house, a Mrs. Stevens, was rude and ungrateful, and it was only desperation that would keep Nettie there. Her back already ached, and it was still morning. There were so many tasks expected of her, that she wondered how she would get through the day. She started by opening the shutters and lighting the kitchen fire. She could not help but compare her life now from what it had been a week ago. Worse still, she missed Ross with an ache that grew bigger every day. She missed his playfulness and the way he made all of them laugh. She missed having someone to help take care of all of them. Sometimes when she thought about the baby growing in her belly, she panicked. How would she be able to raise 3 children alone? There was no doubt she would lose her job when her pregnancy began to show. This time, she had been honest about who Bertha and Matilda were, but something had told her to keep her news about her unborn child to herself. She did not know what she would do when her belly grew, but it wouldn't help to worry about it now. Mr. and Mrs. Stevens came down for breakfast while Nettie was sweeping the hallway. You are running late. You should have the house cleaned before we come down for breakfast, Mrs. Stevens said, wagging a bony finger at Nettie. I'm sorry, Nettie said, rubbing her aching back. What is the matter with you? Mrs. Stevens said, eyeing her suspiciously. Nothing, Nettie said and quickly dropped her hand. Please, it's a little too early for this bickering, isn't it? Mr. Stevens was a tall slim man who wore a permanently weary look. Are you now going to tell me how to relate to my servants? His wife snapped. Mr. Stevens seemed to shrink into himself as Nettie watched. Mrs. Stevens turned to her. I expect you to do better tomorrow. Now, can you serve us breakfast in the dining room? I like my tea piping hot. Yesterday's was lukewarm. Nettie stared after her as she sauntered to the dining room, her husband following with his head bowed. Nettie wanted to shake him out of whatever made him so subservient to his overbearing wife. Remembering her place in time, Nettie sighed and went to the kitchen. From the very first day, Nettie had realized that it was impossible to satisfy her mistress. No wonder there were no other servants in the home. It would take a saint for a person to keep working for the woman. Nettie served them piping hot tea, and when Mrs. Stevens delicately sipped it, she banged the cup back on the table, sloshing the liquid. Do you want to kill us with such hot tea? Nettie bit her tongue as Mrs. Stevens scolded her. She was too tired to cry. How had her life come to this? Carrying a child and working as a housekeeper for this terrible woman? It never ended, the constant accusations of deliberately doing things the wrong way. At noon, Nettie escaped after serving lunch. She got the girls and returned with them to the kitchen. Be sure to eat quietly, Nettie said as she served them leftover soup. One condition of having the girls with her was that she had to keep them absolutely quiet. Mrs. Stephen would not abide the noises children made. The house echoed in silence like an abandoned home. Empty and ghostly quiet. Nettie wondered if the Stevens had children, and if so, where they were. Nettie had no appetite, but thinking of the babe in her belly, she forced herself to eat. The portions were little as Mrs. Stevens hated waste. Can we stay and help you with your work, Nettie? Bertha said. You look tired. How nice of you, Nettie said, her voice shaky. But I can manage. Christmas is next Sunday, Matilda said. Do you think Mrs. Stevens will let us help with decorating the house? Nettie sighed at the innocence of children. Without even asking, she knew the Stevens did not decorate their house, nor take part in any Christmas celebrations. They were miserable people who kept to themselves. Since Nettie had been here, not one person had come calling. She compared that to the store and Ross's home. A day never went by without someone popping into the house to talk to Mrs. Stewart. Nettie missed that life. She missed hearing people's voices and laughter. She missed sleeping next to Ross and waking up to his warm body beside hers. Mrs. Stevens is old, and I don't think she likes her house decorated, Nettie said. Bertha frowned. Mrs. Stewart looks older than Mrs. Stevens, and she was going to decorate the house with us. Pa promised to get a Christmas pine tree, Matilda said, raising her voice in excitement. What's that noise I hear? Mrs. Stevens shouted from the dining room. Nettie? I'm coming, Nettie replied and placed a finger of warning to her lips. Chapter 12. I don't understand what you're saying, Ross said to the man who refused to meet his gaze. His hands deep in his pockets, Mr. Foster finally looked at Ross. Please don't make this any more difficult than it is already. What the gentleman decided was that it doesn't reflect well on our values as a town if our mayor cannot keep his own house in order. Explain yourself, Ross said, genuinely perplexed. All right, Mr. Layton. I'll speak plainly. We feel that we cannot support you with your current domestic situation. Word reached us that Mrs. Layton left town. I'm afraid that doesn't augur well with us or the townsfolk. Understanding dawned. The businessman no longer wanted to support his candidacy. Ross grimaced. I see. He sighed heavily. I will give this some thought. What he wanted to do was lie that Nettie and the girls had gone to visit some relatives. That ought to shut everyone up. Then he wanted to curl inside himself. What was he thinking? Wanting to lie to make things appear better than they were? Why, wasn't that exactly why he'd scorned his own wife? Relief drew itself on Mr. Foster's features, and he left shortly afterward, most likely to report to the others that he had accomplished his mission. After the mercantile door banged shut, Ross slumped onto his stool. He should have been terribly disappointed, but the truth was that he didn't care whether they supported him or not. As a matter of fact, he didn't care for the mayoral position anymore. He looked around the store, his stare dull. Nothing interested him anymore. His waking hours were consumed with thoughts of Nettie and the girls. He wanted them to come back home. Nettie's past did not matter. Nor that she had lied to him. They could make it work. He hadn't even tried before. He understood now what she had meant when she'd said that she hadn't been a rational person after the attack. Who would be after such a heinous act? With distance, he saw just how brave she'd been, taking care of her sisters and doing everything she could to get them out of the unsafe city. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He hadn't gone to the house for lunch, nor did he feel hungry. Work had kept him busy the first week Nettie and the girls were gone, but now he couldn't stand the silence in the mercantile. He felt as though the walls were closing in on him, and he felt an urgent need to get out of the store. He put out his closed sign and locked the door. "I was about to come and check on you," Mrs. Stewart said as Ross trooped into the kitchen. He stopped and stared at her. "Do you know where Nettie and the girls went to?" A smile lit up her face. "I do." She turned away and rustled through a drawer. "Here's the address. I've been keeping it for the day when you would ask." He hadn't planned to go and fetch his family, but holding the address, he wondered what had held him back. Nettie was his wife and Bertha and Matilda were his little girls. They belonged with him. "Anyone who asks, tell them I'll be back in the evening," Ross told a beaming Mrs. Stewart. "Tell the girls I'm making their favorite dinner, chicken dumplings." "I sure will," Ross said, unable to contain his own grin. He sprinted all the way to the livery where he rented a horse and buggy. Clayview was 2 hours by buggy, if he remembered correctly. The roads were icy and his progress was slow, but by 4, he was driving down the road to the house where Nettie worked. It was a huge house and looked gloomy with no lights to be seen. He could have kicked himself for forcing his wife to seek a position in such a cold-looking home. His insides twisted as he wondered how the girls were faring. He followed a wagon trail that led to the back of the house. A small cottage stood a little way from the main house, and as he drew closer, he saw 2 faces peering through the window. His heart leapt when he recognized Matilda and Bertha. He stopped the buggy and leapt out. He ran to the cottage as the door flung open, and he came face to face with his dear girls. "Pa!" they chorused and threw themselves at him, not paying heed to his damp clothes. "Have you come for us?" Bertha asked, still clinging to him. "Yes," Ross said. "Where's Nettie?" "She's always in Mrs. Stevens' house," Matilda said. "All right. Will you do something for me, girls?" "What?" they asked eagerly. "Will you pack up all of your belongings?" They shrieked. "So, we'll be back home in time for Christmas?" Matilda asked. "And we'll get to sing our songs?" "That's my intent," Ross assured her. "And Mrs. Stewart said to tell you that she's preparing your favorite meal, this evening." "Chicken dumplings," they both shouted. Nervousness settled in the pit of his stomach. What if Nettie refused to forgive him? The thought of returning to his gloomy life terrified him. He needed Nettie and the girls back. He would beg if he had to. He raised his hand to knock, but before his could do so, the door flung open. "I thought I heard noises," an angry-looking woman said, glaring at him. "You have the wrong house, whatever it is you want." She made as if to close the door, but Ross wedged his foot in. "I'm pretty sure I have the correct address. I'm looking for Miss Nettie. She's a housekeeper here." The woman frowned. "I'm sorry, but there's no one here by that name. Now if you move your foot." "Ross?" Nettie asked from behind the woman. "Nettie." Ross moved around the woman and rushed into the house. He opened his arms, and Nettie came flying into them. "I shall not have this in my house." "Who are you?" Ross cupped Nettie's precious face. "I can't tell you how much I've missed you. Can you ever forgive me, Nettie?" Tears streamed down her face, and she nodded. "I love you and the girls." "Oh, Ross, I love you, too." He saw her face grow dark. "But this can't be," she said, and gently extricated herself from his embrace. "But it can," he said, his heart in his throat. "It can. I promise. We'll start over." Her expression clouded. "No. You don't understand. What is it? I want you back, Nettie. You and the girls. I've missed you more than I can say. You'll change your mind, she said, tears rolling down her cheeks. There's something you have to know. I am with child. Ross froze. What? How could this be? Was this another of her lies? Why hadn't she told him? The woman watching them shrieked. What? You never told me this when I hired you. I hope you don't think I'll pay you a cent. You're a liar. Ross shot the woman such a look that she clamped her mouth shut. He turned back to Nettie. From the attack, he whispered. She nodded as the tears continued down her cheeks. She lowered her gaze. He hooked a finger under her chin and gently raised her face so that she was looking at him. You only just found this out, he asked, suddenly knowing that she hadn't lied to him in this. Right before I left your house, she choked out. I promise I never knew before that. I mean it. I wasn't lying. His own eyes filled with tears. I know you weren't. And we will raise the child as our very own. She or he will never know. A sob broke from her lips, and she threw herself at him. Let's go home, Nettie. Wait, where are you going? You can't just leave, Mrs. Stevens declared, her voice like acid. Ross pulled Nettie to his side, glared at the woman, and then took Nettie from the house and toward the cottage to fetch the girls. Why, you're sure? Nettie asked. You mean it? Ross felt an inexplicable urge to laugh. He smiled at her, feeling the joy of her presence rush through him. I'm sure, my love. Nettie squeezed his arm. Nettie. Matilda cried, throwing the door of the cottage open. We done packed everything. We're ready to go home. And we get our favorite dinner tonight, Bertha added, all smiles. Nettie grinned at them through her tears. Chicken dumplings? She asked. All four of them burst into laughter. Chicken dumplings, for sure, Ross said, hugging Nettie even closer to his side. The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Susanna Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susanna Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Susanna Calloway Western romance.